Hello and welcome to London Property Alliance's webinar on London's Knowledge Quarter. My name's Lisa Webb and I'm a Senior Planning Partner and Board Member of Gerald Eve and the City Property Association. I seem to spend a large part of my life at the moment talking about the Knowledge Quarter, which I'm sure you know is centred around King's Cross in Islington and Camden and has seen a significant amount of market interest and development activity over the last few years. 2 years ago, the London Property Alliance commissioned a great piece of research on London's knowledge clusters, which looked at the established and emerging clusters across London. Now, the Knowledge Quarter is the most established of these clusters, growing out of its location as home to great institutions such as the Wellcome Trust, UCLH, the British Library, and the Crick, amongst others. With the development of MSD's new HQ and Discovery Centre opposite King's Cross Station soon to start, and the British Library extension coming along soon, this growth is set to continue. Over the next hour, we're going to look at how the Knowledge Quarter has developed, what the market demand and occupier requirements are today, how Camden is supporting its development through planning policies, and what the opportunities and challenges for the Knowledge Quarter are. So first, we'll have a presentation from Dan Pope, Chief Planning Officer at the London Borough of Camden, on Camden's emerging Knowledge Quarter spatial strategy. And then Dan will join a panel discussion with our other panellists. So we have Jodie Eastwood, Chief Executive of Knowledge Quarter London, James Shepherd, Science Partner at Cadans, and Charles Wolford, Director and Head of Life Sciences at Stanhope. Now, as well as the panel discussion, there's an opportunity for you to submit questions, which I can put to the panel. And we've already had a few come through in advance, so there's plenty for them to get stuck into, but please do submit more. So now I'll hand over to Dan, who's going to present on Camden's emerging Knowledge Quarter spatial strategy. Thanks, Dan.
Hopefully you can all see the presentation. So thanks for that, Lisa. Yeah, I'm going to just run through the work we're doing on the future of the knowledge quarter. First of all, I see that one of the questions that has come up is what is the knowledge quarter in Camden? Well, the Knowledge Quarter is the area which is a mile radius from King's Cross. And as you can see on that map, it takes in substantial parts of the London Borough of Camden and Islington, and in particular the central area zone, but also extending up towards Camden Town and also taking in areas like Angel in Islington. And it's important to say, that the Knowledge Quarter is not something new. Many of the institutions which comprise the Knowledge Quarter have been here for, in some cases over 200 years, and it has grown. It has grown organically too, and that's one of the features of the Knowledge Quarter, in that it's merged into the historic pattern of London streets. But really, the Knowledge Quarter we know today was transformed by the investments which have happened over the last 20 years. In particular, the investment in King's Cross Station, St Pancras Station, and the investment into the Francis Crick Institute as well. It's also important to say, this is one of, this is London's Knowledge Quarter, but there are other clusters of innovation across London too. And also the Knowledge Quarter is well linked into other cities which have innovation districts, such as Liverpool, Manchester and Leeds. And of course with HS1, there are good links to innovation districts on the continent too. So this slide just shows the concentration of scientific and knowledge-based organisations in the Knowledge Quarter, which is one of the most dense concentrations in the world. So for example, there are 14 higher education institutions, and that includes world-leading universities such as University College London and Central St Martin's. There are 22 museums and galleries, including, of course, the British Museum, 34 libraries and archive centres, including the British Library, and there's also the Wellcome Trust. Leading research centres such as the Francis Crick Institute, and overall these facilities accommodate over 3,000 scientists, 13,000 academics, and nearly 100,000 students. And these figures are a few years old, so and it's only grown since this information was collated. And the gross value added of Camden and Islington is now similar to the City of London or Manchester and Birmingham combined, which just shows you the economic powerhouse that the Knowledge Quarter is. But at the same time, and I'll focus on this a bit later, we can't escape the fact that nestling cheek by jowl with this economic powerhouse are also, residential communities which have, long-standing structural inequalities, particularly social, economic, and health inequalities. Some of the highest rates of homelessness in the country. Over 40%, over 50% of children in Somerstown, for example, they live in poverty, and it's obviously absurd in a way that these areas also suffer a digital divide when they're in the heart of the Knowledge Quarter. So yeah, about 3 years ago, a science and innovation audit was commissioned by Knowledge Quarter partners, and in particular UCL, the British Library, the Royal Veterinary College, and City University. And this was an audit of science and innovation within that mile radius of King's Cross. And this identified the aspects which drive success, but also those issues which are inhibiting growth, and crucially, the local pressures which local communities are facing. I mean, clearly the Knowledge Quarter has unrivaled accessibility. It's home to Euston, St Pancras, and King's Cross stations. It's got an emerging innovation network and ecosystem, and it's an international leader in artificial intelligence, life sciences, and digital collections, and I'll say more about those in the next few slides. But it's also facing challenges. It's a very popular place to invest, but there is a dearth of good quality sites. There's also a dearth of innovation space, particularly wet lab space for life science startups, and also actually move-on space. And we're finding, companies which are spinning out of the Francis Crick and out of UCL, and also established companies, when they grow, are having to move out of the Knowledge Quarter or London completely to locations with more readily available and cheaper space. And also a lack of business accelerators for the startup firms as well is an issue within the Knowledge Quarter. In fact, the only large-scale innovation facility in the Knowledge Quarter is the London Bioscience Innovation Centre, which was set up by the Royal Veterinary College. And there are local pressures too. Camden's one of the most expensive places to live in London, if not the UK, so there is a housing crisis here. And there's a need to ensure local communities benefit fully and more equitably from the growth that's happening around them. And there's an increasing polarization in income too. And for all these reasons, one of the key recommendations of the audit was the creation of a spatial plan for the Knowledge Quarter to 2050 to create a long-term vision which the Knowledge Quarter partners could subscribe to. So I mentioned before the key strengths of the Knowledge Quarter in life sciences and cultural, scientific, and heritage collections. I appreciate there's a lot of information here, and you'll be able to digest this more when we circulate the slides after. But just to give you a flavour of what's happening in the Knowledge Quarter, it has a third of all data science businesses in London. It's home to world-leading institutions like the Alan Turing Institute, and also there are firms being spun out all the time of the Francis Crick and UCL. I think over the last few years, over 100 companies has been spun out of those institutions, including famously DeepMind. And also, we're seeing investment come in all the time, and I'll say this. I'll say more about this later. But there's investment from people like Google, Facebook, MSD, which has all occurred in the last few years. And again, it's got a lot of strengths in data sciences. There's 5,000 businesses in the Knowledge Quarter which specialise in data science. So just moving. So I mentioned before that one of the key recommendations was a Knowledge Quarter spatial strategy, and this is essentially a local industrial strategy for Camden and Islington, which will feed into our next local plan. It won't be a strategy planning document in itself. And this is really, the purpose of this is really a shared mission addressing the findings of the science and innovation audit. Although the Knowledge Quarter is well known amongst those in this field, there's still a need to build investor awareness and confidence in the Knowledge Quarter and accelerate delivery of major schemes. And crucial to that is the availability of sites. And it's also a means to prioritise infrastructure investment and funding for that. And crucially, one of its purposes to set out the social missions to deliver genuinely inclusive growth for Camden's residents, and how Knowledge Quarter partners can rise to that challenge. And these are the main themes that we'll be addressing in the spatial strategy. So creating an inclusive economy. So that means making sure no one is left behind and everyone benefits from the growth happening around them. And an example of that is our Good Work Camden program, which we've launched recently. It's also about environmental sustainability and delivering on the commitments in our Camden Climate Change Action Plan, and also addressing those inhibitors of growth, which I mentioned earlier. And a really big issue in Knowledge Quarter is, improving the public realm and addressing barriers to movement. And the main one there is Euston Road, which goes right through the heart of the Knowledge Quarter and separates the north of the quarter from the south. And I think a really important point here is that the council is doing a lot of work in this area. We've recently set up the Camden Renewal Commission, and this has set out 4 missions that we'll be working on over the next few years. It's worth me just reading these out. So one is that those in positions of power in Camden are as diverse as our community. Every young person has access to economic opportunity that enables them to be safe and secure. That everyone eats well every day with nutritious, affordable, sustainable food, and that Camden's estates and streets are creative and sustainable. And we're doing a lot of work in this area. And I think a key challenge in this document will be how we translate those missions into this strategy, and what role our Knowledge Quarter partners and investors can do in achieving those missions. And I would say to anyone looking to invest in the Knowledge Quarter, to really become familiar with the work we're doing around the Renewal Commission and understand our priorities in that area. So just quickly, the programme of work, we're hoping to publish this strategy in February 2022. And over the next 3 months, we'll be reconvening the group, which did the original audit of the Knowledge Quarter. And we'll be picking up the results of our recent business survey, the survey that the Knowledge Quarter Partnership did on return to work, and mapping assets and constraints, for example, all the heritage assets, because a lot of the Knowledge Quarter is a conservation area. And crucially, we'll be doing comprehensive engagement. So with Knowledge Quarter partners, community engagement too, and that'll include insights from the Good Life Euston project, which is a really fantastic piece of work in engaging young people in telling the story about their local neighbourhoods, and from that developing a well-being index against which we can measure the success of investment in the area. We'll be having early conversations with Camden STEAM. So that's our program around science, technology, engineering, arts and maths amongst young people. And yeah, as I said, we'll be looking to publish the strategy in 2022. And in advance of doing the Knowledge Quarter spatial strategy, we are making good progress with our site allocations, which is a key part of the local plan. And we do have a dedicated Knowledge Quarter policy in that document, which applies to all major proposals for additional employment, research or learning floor space in the Knowledge Quarter. I won't run through all this, but really what this is attempting to do is make sure that when sites come forward in the Knowledge Quarter, we don't miss the opportunity to address the findings of the audit, so that we're making sure we're providing that startup space, that move on space, where we're building, not undermining the ecosystem, where we're improving the public realm, we're ensuring we're delivering the right type of housing in the right location within the Knowledge Quarter. Housing was identified as a key infrastructure priority within the Knowledge Quarter audit. And also, making sure buildings are long life, low energy and loose fit, and maximising social value at the planning, construction and crucially the end user phases, which is a real focus at the moment. I'll just finish by just giving a flavour of some of the schemes that have been approved or are in planning, and some of these are now being built. So just going from left to right, we've got the project Oriel, which is going to our planning committee later this month. And this is a partnership between Murfield's Eye Hospital, UCL Institute of Ophthalmology and Murfield's Eye Charity to deliver cutting edge research and education under one roof. Then we've got the UK Discovery Centre for MSD at Belgrove House, which we approved earlier this year. And I'll speak more about that later in answer to some of the questions. They've got the British Library Extension, which Charles will speak more about later. We've got the headquarters for Dentsu at Regent's Place, which is nearing completion, one of the most sustainable retrofits in the country, and a really good example of how we're delivering on climate change objectives in the Knowledge Quarter. We've got the Institute of Neurology on Gray's Inn Road, which is now under construction, and that'll be a world-leading centre for research into dementia and other neurological diseases. And finally, we've got the Google headquarters, which is currently under construction. And there's so many other schemes that I could mention there, which just shows how much investor interest there is in the Knowledge Quarter, and why the spatial strategy is so important to make sure that this growth delivers real benefits to the neighbouring communities. And I'll leave it there, but yeah, I'll say a bit more in answer to the questions later.
Thanks very much, Dan. And that's a great introduction to what we're talking about today. And I'm sure lots of people listening are going to be very keen to engage with you on the spatial strategy as it comes forward. And you've picked up some really important themes there, which again, I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit more over the next 45 minutes or so. Can I just start really, Dan, by just asking you, what is it about the Knowledge Quarter that Camden values so much, and what benefits do you see coming out of it to Camden?
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, the Knowledge Quarter is of international significance. I mean, some of the schemes I just mentioned, they're not just some of the most important schemes in the country, but they are world leading, like the Francis Crick Institute, the New Institute of Neurology. These are world leading institutes, and they're also very important for the national economy and also for the local economy. And we understand we have a role as a local authority in making sure the Knowledge Quarter prospers. But at the same time, we have the challenge of making sure this investment addresses the structural inequalities that exist in surrounding communities and deliver social justice. And it's interesting in a way, the pandemic has really turbocharged investment in Knowledge Quarter, but at the same time, it's also disproportionately affected those groups struggling with broader insecurities. And so I think the main thing is there's a real opportunity here to work with our partners in Knowledge Quarter for them to be good neighbours and to address the issues in the area, to address the problems in the area, rather than displace them. So some of the things, some of the opportunities that there are is really, in particular, looking at the end user phase of these developments. So making sure, and I'll say more about this later, but making sure in our Section 106 agreements that we're securing binding commitments on the tenants of these buildings around apprenticeships and work placements, for example. And it's also about supporting our STEAM curriculum and making sure there are pathways into the full range of jobs which are being created here. So so when local young people see these developments being built, that they can see themselves working in these places in the future. So they're not alien buildings being built, but they genuinely see this investment as an opportunity for them. Also, just encouraging investors to embrace our good work Camden scheme and joining our inclusive business network too. And I also think there's an issue around the design of buildings, which we are addressing in recent schemes. Belgrove House is a good example, and I'm sure Charles will say more about this later. But making sure these developments, particularly at ground floor level, create democratic spaces. So not sealed campuses, which provide amazing facilities for staff, but don't really do much for local communities, but actually creating welcoming spaces which deliver useful facilities for local people too. And I suppose another thing is community outreach, and there's already some great examples in the Knowledge Quarter, such as we've got the Story Garden, the British Library, we've got the Living Centre at the Crick. There's the work UCL will be doing with the Calthorpe project next door on Gray's Inn Road. And I guess finally the other opportunity, and something we can't forget, is, as I said before, housing, which was identified as an infrastructure priority in the science and innovation audit. And I can say a bit more about that later. But obviously during the pandemic, we've had key workers travelling, from far and wide to come and work in the Knowledge Quarter, and it's crucial that we provide genuinely affordable homes for key workers and other workers within the Knowledge Quarter as well.
Thanks, Dan. Jodie, you live and breathe the Knowledge Quarter and spend a lot of time with businesses within the area. How have you seen it? What have you seen in terms of the sort of growth over the recent years? And also, Dan's picked up some of the key issues. What are you seeing are the key issues for your members?
So thanks, Lisa. And thank you, Dan, for giving such a great synopsis of the KQ and the work that we're doing together. I think in order to understand growth, I should probably set the scene in terms of how we started and the journey thus far. Otherwise, there's no contextualization there. So the origins of the Knowledge Quarter really started with conversations, and I think that's befitting to the work that we do. And the initial conversations were between the British Library, the Francis Crick and Central St Martin's. So the three heads of these organisations began to talk about what it meant to have the world's largest library sitting next to Europe's largest medical research institute and one of the world's most renowned art and design schools. You know, three incredibly different organisations, but at the heart of everything that they do is the creation and sharing of knowledge. But it became apparent that this density of knowledge creation within this 1 mile radius of King's Cross, the opportunities for neighbours talking to neighbours and the opportunity for innovation and collaboration were being lost. So, you know, the Knowledge Quarter is one of the world's largest innovation districts, but our origins, as Daniel mentioned, set us apart as unique. Many innovation districts are not deeply rooted in history and haven't evolved over time. They're created by governments, landowners, developers to drive inward investment. And many of these spaces are built from the ground up and pay little attention to the existing economies or indeed the communities that circle or populate desirable land pre-development. So we launched in 2014 with 35 partners. And in terms of growth, today we have over 100 members. We are a membership organisation that represents the knowledge creating institutions in King's Cross and beyond. We span all sectors. I strongly believe that clustering is not not of increasing economic benefit. I believe that the best innovation comes from the intersection between different companies, different ideas, different sectors. And there's been a notable increase over the past 6 years in terms of demand from particularly life sciences, AI and machine learning, but also higher education institutions as well. So I mentioned that the KQ positions itself as an innovation district, and in terms of what that is, I'm hoping most of you would know that they are geographical areas where leading edge anchor institutions, which are normally universities or hospitals, and companies cluster and connect with startups, business incubators and accelerators. They're physically compact, as we are, transit accessible and technically wired, and offer mixed use housing, office and retail. So we've collaborated in notable developments in innovation district research and policy since the Brookings piece that I mentioned, including pieces with Centre for London and with Arup. And in terms of the latest insights that came out of the research with Arup, we shared 5 key recommendations for the continued success of innovation districts. I'll share 2 of those with you. I'm conscious that I could sit here and rattle on about the KQ all day, but cities, city regions and innovation districts should continue to secure capital investment in public spaces, physical and digital infrastructure and new buildings in innovation districts. And governments, LEPs and combined authorities and cities should invest in developing the hard and soft networks to support business growth in innovation districts. Now, it would be absolutely impossible for me to cover the breadth and extent of the KQ's work in such a short amount of time, and I've realised I've already been speaking for 3.5 minutes. But I thought I would mention 2 projects, the first being our startup ecosystems research. And in 2019, in partnership with UCL, we undertook a survey of the startup ecosystem in and around King's Cross. And some significant findings on recommendations of the research included that affordable co-working space is being pushed out of the area. And these affordable co-working spaces are also often known as co-working plus spaces that should provide more than just a hot desk for startups. So the recommendation is that there should be more done to reduce business rates or accommodate genuinely affordable co-working spaces that would otherwise be lost. And also in response to the SIA, the flexible lab space is something that's lacking in the KQ. So future development should include lab space or flexible workspace that could be upgraded to lab space when needed. LBIC has been mentioned, but Imperial's White City Accelerator are also really good examples of how to do this. And just finishing, in terms of what we as the Knowledge Quarter are looking to deliver in terms of innovation space, we are actually in the process of scoping out around 15,000 square foot of space within the KQ to provide a co-working, collaboration, innovation, accelerator, incubator space that would really begin to solidify the relationship between the ecosystem and the KQ. And I will leave that there.
Thanks very much, Jodie. James, perhaps I can come to you. You've been involved in the growth of the Knowledge Quarter in a number of different ways, firstly working at the Crick and then advising on a number of the major developments, your time at Cushman's and now your science partner at Cadans. And Dan and Jodie have picked up on some of the sort of space requirements that have come out of some of this research, but perhaps you could tell us a little bit about what is the market demand for the Knowledge Quarter and where's it coming from? And I guess in particular, labs and life sciences has been mentioned. What do those occupiers in particular want from their workspace?
Thanks, Lisa, and thank you for having me. And to pick up on Jodie's point as well, I also worked at the Imperial Incubator in White City, so I'd like to think I have a reasonably unique viewpoint when it comes to the Knowledge Quarter, and now as a developer looking to invest in the KQ as well. So to pick up on your question, Lisa, so answering the kind of the first part around the market demand, well, it's kind of the hardest question really to answer in life sciences is where is the demand coming from? Who is looking for space? You know, you have very visible deals like MSD, but that is a once in a decade deal in life sciences. That is not something that comes around day in, day out. Unfortunately, I wish it was, but even in the States, you know, you rely much more on kind of speculative, sort of last minute, if you like, inquiries. So that market demand in the Knowledge Quarter for me really comes in two different buckets. You have what I kind of refer to as internal, and this picks up on Dan and Jodie's point. These are the great businesses being created by places like the Crick Institute, like UCL, Wellcome Syncona, et cetera, et cetera. And these are what I kind of classify sort of internal demand, as well as the companies that are growing at LBIC, for example, and other incubators around the Knowledge Quarter and London. And then, as Jodie and Daniel very well articulated, the Knowledge Quarter doesn't just have a UK reputation, it has an international reputation. And you see a tremendous number of businesses from all over the globe wanting to locate in the Knowledge Quarter. And the demand far outstrips the supply. And you know, it's been alluded to several times now, the kind of lack of supply and the spatial strategy needed to rectify that. But you're seeing companies from all over the globe in all different industries wanting to be based in the Knowledge Quarter. And I guess we've started to unpick the reason why, but from the kind of life science perspective, I think there is a kind of sort of two-layered approach really. And this leads into, Lisa, into your second question around kind of what do companies really want? And if I focus kind of more solely on the SMEs, which sort of is the broadest sector of demand at the moment, we'll try and sort of answer a few of those kind of different points in the sort of 120 seconds I have left. So on a kind of macro level, what do these companies want? Well, the first thing is quite frankly space. So they want space in the Knowledge Quarter, and that could be anything from a desk in a co-working centre all the way through to a kind of 150,000 square foot plus HQ building. And there just isn't the space. And in life sciences, part of the challenge is that there are very few developers willing to take the plunge and build speculatively. And that is what is required in life sciences. And you have to take on that risk and build a speculative building with the help of people like Jodie, with the help of the planning authorities to make sure you get the building right. But ultimately, you have to take that risk as a developer and build speculatively. So the always alarming stat for me is that there is more life science space in one building in New York than there is in the whole of London. Commercial life science space, I should add, commercial life science space. And that is pretty kind of damning, but that is going to change. And the Knowledge Quarter is going to be critical to that. The second sort of macro level is people. And people is a word that gets misused a lot and gets misused as the word graduates. Now, don't get me wrong, graduates are absolutely critical, but these businesses don't just function on PhDs, postdocs. They require a broad spectrum of men and women to work in these businesses, from reception staff and the operations staff all the way through to the chief executive. These people come from broad demographics, and this is where somewhere like the Knowledge Quarter really stands out, is that you have that broad array of talent at every single level to help these businesses start, grow and develop. And that is part of the reason MSD, Google, all of these companies are attracted to the Knowledge Quarter, is the depth of talent available. So those are the kind of two macro levels. And then just sort of finalizing, or finally on a sort of micro level, what do these companies want? Well, flexibility is the kind of critical element here. And flexibility comes on both the technical side, so the building and how the building is set up, and you typically will see a laboratory change in a building, maybe 10 to 15% every year. So that might be simple things like moving equipment from one room to another, or it might be moving partitions, it might be moving air handling units, but all of this requires an inherent flexibility in the base build. So making sure that you get that right from the moment you first engage with your architects is absolutely critical, because that sets the tone for the flexibility of that space for the lifetime of that building. And I believe one of the questions was around retrofitting. And given that flexibility that these labs are requiring, you can start to see why retrofitting becomes a little bit more challenging in a building that was never designed to be this flexible. So that flexibility comes on the design, the technical, the build, it comes on the commercial elements. These businesses grow rapidly. It's not uncommon. Gamma Delta Therapeutics from the Crick Institute is a fantastic example. Company Charles and Stanhope will know very well. Started in a small incubator in the White City incubator, moved across to the White City hub across the road, and I believe have just taken a whole host of more space. 5 years ago, that company didn't exist, or maybe a bit longer than that, 5 or 6 years ago, but they are growing massively. So you need to have commercial terms that are set up flexibly. And finally is around the kind of operational expertise of a landlord. These businesses, you pick them up at a time when they are, it's not meant to sound patronizing, but vulnerable, and they need a bit of help and support from landlords to get them up and running and get them going. And utilizing the operational expertise of someone like Cadarn's is really important for these businesses to help them kind of grow and develop and ultimately, hopefully thrive. So sorry, I've covered a lot there. Hopefully that helps, Lisa.
And that's great, James, thanks. And it leads very nicely onto Charles, because Charles, you are leading a major development project in the Knowledge Quarter at the moment with the British Library extension, working with Mitsui. From your experience on that project, what features of the Knowledge Quarter make it particularly attractive for you as developer? And what do you think the challenges and opportunities are for developers creating space in the Knowledge Quarter?
Thank you, Lisa. I hope everyone can hear me. I've got my mic on. And thank you for the other speakers. It was a great introduction. I feel like I don't need to say very much, actually, but I will. I thought I might, before I go into the specific questions, I better just set the scene in case people don't know much about the project. Dan very helpfully put up a picture of the proposal, but the project is, it obviously starts with the British Library wanting an extension, which basically is based upon their vision for the future, which is contained in a document called Living Knowledge. And a key component of that is a physical extension onto land that they own at the back of the existing library. And after a very lengthy sort of process, OG process, they selected a developer partner, and that was us and Mitsui in 2017. The whole process started in 2015, so it's been a long haul. And it's three projects, actually. It's not only is extending the library and providing 130,000 feet of new publicly accessible space, which I think is an important point to make, given what Dan was saying about inclusivity and the connecting with local communities. So we have the great gift of building a building that has huge amounts of public space, which is available for everybody effectively. It also provides new learning space and business space, gallery space, event space, headquarters for the Alan Turing Institute, which has been mentioned, and a new conservation centre for the library. It obviously includes a lot of circulation spaces. It has to connect east, west, north, south to the existing building, and importantly has equal sort of entrances, east and west, and being one onto Somerstown, which Dan's referred to as the neighbouring residential community with its issues. Secondly, the land was safeguarded by TfL for Crossrail 2. Yes, Crossrail 2, that is. So we have to provide significant infrastructure works to enable that to come along, because it sits underneath the site. So we have to provide a large ventilation shaft to a depth of about 30 metres. On the western part of the site, a pedestrian subway at basement level, which will connect the proposed Crossrail 2 station at Euston with St Pancras. And then last but not least, of course, is the commercial development on top of the library spaces and on top of the Crossrail spaces. And we're going to provide about 600,000 square feet on 10 levels, providing office space that can be upgraded on 6 floors to provide laboratory space if required to accommodate the requirements of the occupiers that James was referring to. And importantly, the commercial is funding the other two. So it's funding the extension and it's funding the Crossrail works. So the project has to work very hard. So why are we attracted to the Norwich Quarter? I mean, I think to the site, a lot's been said about it already, and I don't want to repeat that. But at the end of the day, this is a 3-acre site, and it's a pretty good piece of real estate, just as a basic fundamental. People have mentioned the connectivity of King's Cross. It is probably the most connected part of London, and it's connected to other bits of the UK, and it's 40 minutes from Cambridge, which is important in a sort of life science angle and tech angle. And we've got other infrastructure coming along, HS2 from Euston. Argents have done a fantastic job for us in terms of the 67 acres along with their partners at Camden, and created new vibrant quarters we all know about, which has been incredibly successful and is elevated King's Cross to a mature submarket that's on every major occupier's list. And demand has held up over the last difficult year or so. You know about the Norwich Quarter and the organisations that are there, so I don't think I'll say much more about that, but that's a key reason why we're interested. But I mean, when you get down to the basics of the site, we are squeezed between the library and the Alan Turing Institute and the Francis Crick Institute. And as somebody said, the FCI is Europe's largest biomedical research centre. It's got 1,500 scientists in there, of which I think it's about an average of 10 Nobel Prize winners at any one time, which I think is probably the greatest concentration of Nobel Prize winners on Earth. And that's our immediate neighbour to the north. So when we got first involved, it was still under construction, and we started to do some research into this emerging demand, or new urban demand, I would call it, from the life science sector. And interestingly, within 24 hours of being selected, the announcement in April 2017, a major life science company contacted us and said, when could we deliver a building? So that probably says something about the site. I think it's renowned in the life science sector as being called a bullseye location in London. I'm just conscious of time. Do you want me to go on, or just, I was going to mention some opportunities and challenges, but I'm just wondering about the time, Lisa.
I think just briefly, Charles, if you can, that'd be helpful.
Okay, right, yeah. So we're obviously massively excited by this project. We've done our research into the sector. We asked what sort of questions we asked were things like, is this a bubble? And I think we concluded conclusively that it's not a bubble. This is the drivers of aging populations and finding cures and treatments for major illnesses is going to go on. It's sort of non-cyclical. And the government is invested in it, and obviously that's been writ large in the last year. Talked about Norwich Quarter, a fantastic opportunity, but I think the actual specific opportunity we have on this site with working with the library, and it's not a marriage of convenience, it is actually putting the two things together. We're over here and the library extension's over there. This is one building with library at the bottom and commercial above. And that means that there's this huge potential to create a really interesting sort of product by combining the library spaces and the commercial spaces within the same building, leveraging the public spaces of the library and encouraging collaboration between business, library and the local community. So some of the challenges I think have been talked about. It's a specification. What do these companies want? There is no BCO life science specification. And then alongside that is that some existing buildings can't easily be retrofitted, which has been mentioned before. We all know the office market in London is incredibly mature. All the players in it, we know how much buildings are to build. We know how much they are going to rent for, and we know what capital value we're going to get. Those things are unknown, actually, or not terribly well known in the slightly opaque and nascent market that we are dealing with. So that's a bit of a risk, or significant risk. We don't know too much about sustainability of demand. There's a lot of hearsay, and it's been mentioned before. I mean, the closest we've got to a sort of spec building, but it was actually pre-let in the true terms of the expression, is the MSD deal. And we've had to look to America, where there is a mature market, to get our evidence, which seems quite bizarre. But their developers do develop spec buildings to enhance specifications and do achieve premiums over office rents. There are lots of further challenges I could mention: ecosystems, SMEs and managing them, unpredictability of SME demand, how much space to provide for them, the rapid growth or death of SMEs, and market changes. But by far the biggest challenge, I think, is the availability of land, which someone mentioned.
Thanks, Charles. I think there's so much in this. I think we could talk about it for a long time. There's so many issues coming up, but I am conscious of time. And one thing I did want to come back to before we hopefully have time for a couple of questions was something, Dan, that you mentioned right at the beginning, which is the inclusive economy and the opportunity of the Knowledge Quarter. And one of the key messages in the Knowledge Clusters research was that a positive impact on the local community is a key measure of success for a knowledge cluster. And I know certainly from the work that we're doing in the Knowledge Quarter that there's a lot of very good work happening with these developments and the public benefits that are being delivered through them, not least Belgrove House, that's been mentioned a couple of times, MSD's new HQ, and also the library, and there's other developments also coming through. So it's a really important topic, and I think it'd be really helpful if I could just ask each of you really, how you think the growth in the Knowledge Quarter can benefit the local communities. So Dan, would you like to start off from Camden's perspective?
Yeah, sure. I think in a nutshell, the ambition or the priority is ensuring that all the Knowledge Quarter resources are shared for the widest public benefit. We've heard today about the level of investment that's coming into the Knowledge Quarter. As I said before, its GVA is the equivalent to Manchester and Birmingham combined. And one of the things is, how can we leverage that massive spending power for the benefit of local communities? We've got a burgeoning number of anchor institutions locating in the borough, and how can local businesses benefit from that? How can we build our local supply chains, to capture that spend locally, so it's not leaking out of the borough. We're missing out on that opportunity. I've mentioned Good Work Camden. I've mentioned our inclusive. I've mentioned our inclusive business network. We're also doing a program called Lift with Hackney, Tower Hamlets, and Islington, and that's one of the purposes of that is just acknowledging that we've got these growth sectors. How can local residents, especially underrepresented groups, help them to set up new businesses within these growth sectors, and also just trying to build on the great work that our STEAM program is delivering. So improving career opportunities for young people and ensuring businesses can benefit from the range of talent in the borough. I mean, James was mentioning before the challenges around recruitment and attracting talent, and really a lot of that talent lives in the borough. It lives in the communities next door. They just haven't had the chance to show their talent, and it's about building people's skills, building that STEAM curriculum and providing really sustainable employment for people who live locally, and that's not just in the construction phase, but longer term. And that's why I said before, it's about that those end user commitments, which we've secured at Belgrove House. And just finally, just as an example, Belgrove House is a really good example of how we will deliver this. So in Belgrove House, we've secured a community education space, which will support the delivery of the STEAM-based education program for 20 years. So there's essentially there'll be a classroom in that building for 30 students, and it will deliver a STEAM-based education curriculum to over half the secondary schools in the borough. MSD have committed to employing a full-time education liaison manager, and to deliver that to the local community. That's just one thing that Belgrove's delivering. It's also got a fantastic employment and training plan and a fantastic end user phase commitments. Also delivering affordable workspace as well for those local startups. So
yeah, thanks, Dan. And yeah, I think as someone said, MSD is quite a unique deal, and it's obviously very helpful to have the tenant known when you're doing the 106, so that you can look at actually what can be delivered, and they can make commitments at that stage, which is great. Charles, in terms of the library, I know you've been giving thought as well to what benefits can come out of the library for the local community. Do you want to just sort of briefly explain what your thinking is around that?
Yeah, I would underline what you just said. It's sort of slightly easier when you've got a known occupier, yet we have to build a spec building for some of the reasons said before. So makes it a bit harder to bind people you don't know yet into commitments. But the way we are looking at it is sort of, I think, fairly sort of, well, the initiative we have is that we have the library as a known occupier, and the library is making many commitments to apprenticeships and job opportunities and open access to the community, and that's great. From the commercial side, as I say, it's slightly less easy for us to make lots of binding commitments. But what we are looking at is setting up a platform which effectively will provide a link between the community and occupiers, where communities' needs are communicated and fed back into occupiers. And I'm making a sort of the assumption here, having seen ESG grow massively through corporate agendas over the last year, especially. Everything seems to happen in the last year in terms of acceleration. But there are employees, investors, and companies themselves. If they want to work in this area, and Camden want to see them giving something back. I think that will be one of their priorities, and therefore, by setting up a sort of platform where they can tap into ready-made projects that have been worked out with the community, I think it should be a marketing edge actually for a building, frankly. So that's what the commitment we can make, is to set up that infrastructure to try and make that happen.
Thanks. And Jodie, I'm sure you've got lots of initiatives on in this area. Is there any you can share with us today?
I could, but I'm conscious of time. I just want to mention 4 things, or 4 headlines. So meaningful employment. And when I mean meaningful, this is falling outside of cleaning, catering, retail, security. So meaningful employment for local community members. Co-curation. All of our communities have had enough of all of these big institutions and developers going, we know what's best for you, that's what we're going to build. Don't do that. Build it with them, co-curate these spaces with them. The third is participatory governance. So get local community representatives visible on decision-making panels, boards within those development processes. And the last is inclusive procurement. So thinking about where you're purchasing from, and if you need to put any stipulations on where your tendering is and how your tendering is scored. I could share lots of other projects, but I think that those are good 4 headlines.
I'm sure. Thanks, Jodie. Thanks very much. I'm really conscious of time, and I know we had lots of questions in advance of this, and I know we've had some in as well while we've been talking, and there's sort of an awful lot being covered. We're probably only going to get to one of them, but it's quite a good one, I think, and picks up on a theme that's been run through it today, really, which is about space requirements. And James, if you don't mind, I'll ask you it, I think. It's from Ross Jacobson of Grove World, who asked, with a constrained development pipeline, how will the Knowledge Quarter retain its competitive edge, and must it grow geographically?
Hi, Ross. I think, should it grow geographically is maybe a question for Jodie. It's not my place to say, but I would probably say no. I think having that concentrated area is a good thing and a positive thing. I do genuinely think that there is a danger that if space isn't brought forward to the market, companies will just stop looking in the Knowledge Quarter, and will start going to elsewhere in London or even further afield. I think everybody on this call is united in our desire to keep companies in London at the kind of worst case scenario, but obviously within the Knowledge Quarter more specifically. And it's back to my earlier point around the way that it remains is by developers taking a risk and building speculatively. And we require all of our companies to be as innovative as possible, and as such, we as developers need to be as innovative as our companies. And if that means taking a risk and doing something a little bit differently, whether it's for ESG or whether it's building your underwriting model to make sure that you can build speculatively, or whatever it is, I think that innovation piece and that appetite to risk is the way that both developers and the Knowledge Quarter more generally maintains that competitive edge and maintains its visibility in the market. And I think the longer that we wait and not build any of these sort of really important schemes that Dan and others have mentioned, I think you might reach an inflection point where companies start going, you know what, there's no space there, so we're not even going to bother looking. So I don't think we're there yet, but I think we need to start pushing the button on a few schemes and taking a bit of risk.
Thanks, James. That's a great way to finish today's discussion, I think, and lots to think about going forward. So thanks, Dan, for a great presentation and introducing the Knowledge Quarter, and to all our panel members for what I think was a fascinating debate. And thanks to everyone who tuned in to listen. And just a reminder that you can access this and all the other digital content from the London Property Alliance on its website in due course. So thank you, everybody, and have a good afternoon.